Hi, and welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. We are so glad that you're here, that you're listening, and hopefully that you are a part of the conversation. In the last couple of weeks, we've talked about just trials and hardships, and even to the point of persecution, and how we all go through those things, and God says we're going to go through those things, and we think it's true. And so today we are going to talk about some of those trials and some of those hardships and some of those things that people just go through. And we have some special guests in today. We have Danille and Kevin. And Gary and I have known them for many, many, many years.
Going 30, maybe, really?
30 for you?
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, it's been about 20 for me.
9.
Yeah, Kevin was 9. But yeah, so we have them in to kind of tell a story about what they've gone through in the last couple years, and that's just been through something I think a lot of people go through, and that is a diagnosis of cancer and treatment, and just where that's led them and how they've been changed by it. And hopefully the reason we're doing this is to kind of hopefully help someone else out who might be going through it, or someone who may know someone going through cancer diagnosis. They may be able to help those people navigate through those waters. And so that's why we tell these stories, is so that we can help each other out.
So if you remember, Jeremy, at the end of our persecution series, we talked about the scripture doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about the actual trial. It spends a lot of time talking about our response to the trial. So we're going to hear Kevin and Danelle's response to a hard diagnosis, and this is where I think there'll be some vicarious learning out there.
So with that, let's get into your story, and just maybe the first place to start is just kind of sharing about your life before the diagnosis, and you can go back as far as you'd like with that, but just telling us about a little bit about who you are, what you've been through prior to this, and just kind of what your life was like at that point.
We met at a really young age and dated for 3 years, long distance, and we knew we really, really liked each other. So we got married I was 19, and we moved to Southern California. So Kevin was in school for 3 years. So again, we had a lot of distance between us because he was so busy in school and such. And then after he graduated, we moved back to Northern California and started raising our family. And we just liked being together. We were just in the midst of all that. We had 2 young children, and then moved to Arizona. And throughout all of that, we would attend church and together just try to grow in our faith. And so that was very big to us, very important to us, raising our children in church and Sunday school and Awana, the whole 9 yards. And then we had our 3rd child in Arizona, and again, just the time clicked on. We got them all through high school and college somehow, and all 3 are married now, so we're feeling good about all of that. Now it's just the 2 of us again, which is good.
So I've done marital counseling long enough to know that was Danelle's story, but do you agree with all that, Kevin? Like the whole thing, we fell in love, great life. This would be a time for you to say, yes, Gary, I believe
yes.
the story. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, truly, yes. We're, I think both from the outside and certainly from the inside, as you said, and when we were talking earlier, that we really did have a charmed life, to use a strange term. But, there were problems with me in the spiritual realm of things, that I didn't like church. Really, I'd rather stay home and watch football. I like small groups.
I like football.
Yeah, I like football. But she went over the early history, so I'll sort of pick it up from there. I don't think it's coincidence that when this whole thing started, because the disease, it was a chronic disease that finally got to a point where it had to be addressed. But when it started, when we first became aware of it, was exactly like to the month, maybe less than a month, maybe to the 2 weeks that we left organized church.
Really?
Yes, the which had been sort of quote unquote the church that we had gone to, that I sort of was never comfortable at and would rather watch football.
And it had nothing to do with one of the pastors, right? Or either one of them. Like you weren't I was the pastor of that church, so you weren't uncomfortable with me. This is all
No.
self-serving right now.
That's another story.
So, I mean, you say that, it's more than coincidence. Tell me why you bring up that point. It's almost 2 weeks or a month to the point.
I haven't figured that out yet, but Danille really changed at that time point. I mean, she really changed so much that I could notice it. And I'm the typical husband who really doesn't notice much except food and golf.
Right. Yeah.
So I've noticed it. She really changed. And so it wouldn't surprise me if someday God tells me, well, I needed to change her to get her ready for what her role would be. And also maybe he needed to change me, and that was part of how we were going to change. I don't know, but it's pretty funny that those two very significant events occurred at basically the same time.
Yeah, and I think God can multitask. I think he could probably do those both at the same
easily,
time.
yeah. So because it was a chronic disease, I was fine for a long time, and I think we met and talked, and I'd say, well, the doctors don't know really when it'll get too bad or if it ever will, and I took various medications to sort of cope with it that really had no impact on me at all, at least that I could feel. But then last year, about 18 months ago now, I would say 17 months ago.
Wow.
So in the early spring of 2017, I started not feeling good, and they started doing more blood tests and more blood tests and more blood tests. And they called me one day when I was playing golf, and so I didn't answer the phone. But then I called them back after the round of golf, and Dr. Sproat, who wound up being the transplant surgeon that worked with me, told me that I needed to come and see her because it was time for a bone marrow transplant. Now, I think God had a hand in preparing me for that too, because I knew that was the final answer, and I'd known for about 8 years. So I had read upon it, and I knew sort of what was coming, but I wasn't happy about it at all. So then, sometime around the beginning of August of last year, so about a year and a month ago now, I went in to start the bone marrow transplant.
And if you could take just a brief second and explain maybe the uniqueness of your cancer. I'd never heard about it before.
Well, the bone marrow is an amazing organ. It produces everything that's in your blood, everything. And you have some just absolutely amazing things in your blood. It's really beyond belief what the bone marrow does. But the bone marrow also is subject to cancer. Now, the big working machines, the thing that does everything in the bone marrow is a stem cell. And some of my stem cells were mutated, and the mutated stem cells were taking over. And when they do that, they scar the tissue that's in the bone marrow. If you've ever looked inside of a cow bone or even a chicken bone, if you cut it and look at it, you'll see like a spongy area.
Can't say
in the
that I've
middle.
done that, but
Yeah. Well, like if you're out hiking, you come across.
Okay. Nice
Anyway,
recovery. Yeah.
the spongy stuff inside is the marrow. Well, that can get scarred, and that's what was happening to me. Not only were the stem cells malfunctioning because they weren't made correctly, they were mutated. They were also beating up the spongy tissue around them and leaving it so it couldn't function. And so it got to the point where not that the bone marrow was completely shot, but that the stuff it was making was either way too much or way too little. And so I wound up, as people with leukemia, and all these diseases are related to leukemia, I had wound up with way too many white blood cells, like 1,000 times more than you have.
Wow.
And that's when they knew it was time.
So, Danille, I've known you. You've helped me in the youth group, and so I was around you enough. You're a very positive, upbeat person. So tell me the difference between 8 years ago when you knew the chronic disease was there. When you heard it, I can almost hear you say, oh, we're going to beat this thing. We're going to march right through. And then comes the diagnosis of this is serious. Tell me what your inner thoughts were, and were they different than what your outer expressions were to him?
Well, all along, I would say that really, truly, my hope and trust was in God. And so I really always did feel very hopeful throughout it all. And I thought, in the beginning, I thought, well, we have this going on. I always said it just was sort of simmering on the back stove. We always knew it was there, but there was quite a long period where it really didn't dominate our life and our thoughts. We really were just plugging along with life. And then when we got the news, more than a year ago that, yeah, it's time for the transplant. You have 6 weeks to get ready. We got to find a donor, all that stuff. It really, really hit me like a Mack truck and flattened me because there was so much fear. And fear was very overwhelming. So there was the being positive with Kevin. I remember one time he was telling me, I don't think I'm going to have the transplant. And right away I was like, you have to have the transplant. And because we were told you have it or he'll be dead in 6 weeks. So we really were faced with this, this is the only thing that's going to save you. But his response was, I don't have to have it. And I have a good friend who actually went through something very similar to this, who told me, because I had shared that I wanted him to be open with me and talk to me, because he did tend to sort of keep his feelings and thoughts to himself oftentimes. Yeah. And so I said, you have to tell me what's going on. And so she's the one that said, if you expect him to share with you his thoughts and his feelings, you can't say things like, you have to do this. So I gave him room to say, I don't want to have the transplant. Yeah. Which then eventually he did get to the point where he was willing to go through it.
So those were your reactions to it. You have 3 grown kids at this time. 2 married. Was just Becca married?
Yeah.
Okay, Becca was married at this point. What'd they kind of go through? What were your thoughts with telling them?
Well, we didn't even get to tell them. They knew something was going on, but the transplant coordinator actually called each kid first, which was okay with us. In some ways it was even better for us because she prepared them, but the reason she called them is they needed to be tested for a match. Because throughout the whole world, even Kevin's 4 siblings were not a match, and he had to have 100% match. So instead they were going to go with what they call a half match, or haploid, which would be our children. So they didn't even hear it from us first.
What were their responses when they did talk to you at that point? Was there? I mean, of course, there's concern, but what were their emotions? What were the things that they kind of processed through once they heard from you?
Becca cried. Mm-hmm. All 3 of them responded pretty much how you would think if you know the 3 of them. Sarah pretty much got on like, okay, where do I need to be? What do I need to do? And Micah was pretty much like,
analytical,
we'll get through this. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, their responses matched their personalities perfectly.
Yeah.
I
And so
mean, they all cared and were hurt, but they all handled it in the way that fits with them, that allowed them to step into it the very best they could.
Yeah.
I think.
And even the fact that the coordinator called each of them individually, by the time that had taken place from our drive from Mayo at Scottsdale to home, we got home to do a conference call with the 3 kids. Well, they already knew. So it turned out to be they'd
already had time to process a little bit.
and kind of know what was expected of them to get tested and such. And it gave us a sweet conversation. The 5 of us, we had a sweet conversation instead of having to give the news.
One thing that happened that was very interesting was at that point in time when we were having the teleconference with them, it had not been decided who the donor would be. It was one of those 3. They all wanted to do it.
Wow. Yeah. What's that do to a dad's heart? Touching, huh? Yeah. And I was just wondering I really got to know Kevin. We sat in the backseat of a vehicle going on a mission trip to Mexico. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, with the gentleman that lives up in Oregon now.
Phil.
Yeah. And so we got to meet, got to talk, got to see him in a different way. And Kevin is such an analytical guy, too. In fact, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but you've ruined baseball for me.
Oh, we know.
Yeah, so I sat next to him at a Diamondback game with his daughter, and he's like, how big is that scoreboard? I go, I don't know. So they sat there and mathematically figured out how big that was, and I'm like, you've ruined baseball for me forever. So
Well, and Kevin's an engineer too. So
I know.
that
Yes, I
had
gotta
a
give
little
him
bit of
credit.
something to do with
he
it.
figured it out almost to the inch how big the screen was, and I don't even know who won or lost the game. But how does an analytical mind handle emotional stuff? Because you were forced into some emotional things that kind of short wires an analytical guy. So tell me about that process. Did you overthink, or did you hide emotions? Can you kind of remember how you handled everything?
I'll answer, but I'd also like to hear Danille's answer afterwards.
Yeah, that's great.
I took the engineering approach. I wanted to know the statistics. I wanted to know the duration of the medications. I wanted to understand all the details. And so I found them out. But ultimately, that doesn't matter. I mean, what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And then, after the treatment, the actual treatment was pretty long. It was about 6 days long.
Wow.
Yeah.
Of ablative chemo.
Yeah, the first set of chemo was 6 days, and then knock you out down flat chemo. And then a couple days, maybe 3 days of nothing. And during that 3 days, they did the actual inputting of mica stem cells into my blood.
Yeah.
And then 2 more days of a special type of chemo that's designed to keep my body from rejecting
his
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And after that, there's no analytical mind. I mean, you just grab and hang on. I mean, you can't think your way through anything at that point.
Yeah.
Nothing. Which is really hard for me because I think my way through things.
It is not. It was out of your comfort zone for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and the chemo was really intense, a lot more intense than your regular bout of chemo, from what I understood.
That's true.
So it was, just to give perspective to people who are listening, I mean, it was really, I mean, I don't even know how to put it, but it was.
Well, they called it ablative.
Yeah.
So it's to kill everything.
It was abrasive as anything.
Super aggressive, super, yeah.
I mean,
Intense.
basically what you do over, 10 weeks normally, you were doing in 6 days.
Yeah.
And then some.
People patients that have long-term chemotherapy, they're getting very small doses.
Yeah.
And they're trying to just beat down whatever the person has and put them into remission. The doctor told me yesterday, we weren't trying to put you into remission. We were trying to kill everything and then give you new stem cells. So it's actually curative as opposed to just trying to put you into remission. But that's why it's brutal. I mean, it's brutal.
When you talk about grabbing on and hanging on, I remember calling both of you and asking, I'm a part of this prayer team from guys around the world. Not even sure how I got introduced to it, but I asked if I could put your name in, and we found out that, I think it was Thursdays. Was it Thursdays or Fridays? Every Friday at noon, our time, there was close to 500 people around the world praying for you. How did that help your grabbing on and hanging on? Can you share a little bit about that?
So, a lot of times when you work with God on something in your life, you think, that's the punchline,
Yeah.
And then a little time goes by. Oh, no, this is the punchline,
Yeah.
Well, I think what happened to me with respect to prayer, how I think about prayer is the punchline, at least for right now. But I know it may change. But, being analytical, I used to think, well, okay, someone prays for something and then it occurs. Is that causal or is that just coincidence?
Yeah.
And being an engineer, I always think, well, it can't be causal. I mean, the world of physics. And so I sort of maybe had a jaded view of prayer going into this. But coming out of it, and I've told Danille this, I don't understand how it works, but I know that it does.
Yeah. Wow.
And so now I really, at the time, she'd say, well, there's 300 people that prayed for you at noon today. She told me every time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was because of my state or because of what I thought about prayer previously, but I just couldn't really wrap myself around it.
Just informational fact.
Yeah, it didn't upset me, and I was very actually appreciative that people were thinking of me.
Yeah.
But I don't think I understood the power. But afterwards,
I've become convinced, and this is only over the last 3 months, that
Wow.
it's a system that I don't understand. I can't put it in an Excel spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even theorize about it because I have no idea how it works. But I'm convinced that it does.
Yeah.
I'm just convinced that it does.
You just gave a perfect theological description of faith. Can't understand it. I just know that it's real. How did it affect you, Danille? Was it encouraging to you?
Knowing that people were praying.
Yeah, even people you didn't know who didn't know your story. Sometimes people feel less affected when there's people just praying for. They didn't even know your name, but they knew there's a man in Arizona. That's all some of the people
Right.
knew around the world.
Oh, it really touched my heart and blessed me. And yeah, it is remarkable that's just one of the best things about believers is, we pray for each other and people we don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I struggled a little when someone would say they were praying for complete healing, because I'm like, well, thank you for that. But I thought, I don't know that that's what God has here. I am hoping for that, but I don't know that that's what will happen. So
I'm not even sure I know what that means.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that complete healing means when we're in glory, when
Yeah.
we're with Jesus,
Yeah.
really. But
Yeah, maybe that's the punchline.
Yeah.
yeah. So, but it was remarkable.
Yeah. So off air, we were talking a little bit about the changes you go through, and you'd mentioned Kevin, the man you knew, was nothing like he was. Explain that a little bit for us. It's like you didn't even know the man you'd been married to for 29, 30 years. So
Yeah. Probably the hardest thing for me was to be with him, and he was nothing like my Kevin at all. He did not look like him. He didn't act like him. And we were joking, but he did not smell like him. And it was, there wasn't one thing about him that was the same. And it was so hard for me. What I would do is I would just look deep, deep into his eyes and just cry out to God, please let me see Kevin. Let me feel Kevin. And
Yeah.
that's the only thing is like really when our eyes is how we identify each other. I've realized that in other circumstances, people's eyes don't change. And that was sometimes the only lifeline that I would have is looking into his eyes. And we did have a couple of pictures in our house that we had taken remarkably right before this whole ordeal started. We didn't even know. And they too, I would look at those pictures and go, that's real. This isn't real. This poor suffering person on the couch this is not real.
yeah.
And that's,
You know how many married couples that are listening to this who haven't looked into each other's eyes for such a long time that maybe they wouldn't even recognize that. I mean, a note to all of you married couples out there: after you hear this, put this on pause right now and go stare into your spouse's eyes somewhere really deep. And
it will take you to a new place. You will remember how much you love them and why you love them.
yeah,
And who they are and what you love about them.
yeah. But tell me what your inner thoughts were. I mean, those were all the facts. He didn't look the same, smell the same, which may or not been a blessing. I never spent that much time smelling it before. What were your inner thoughts thinking? Like, did you have to relearn how to love someone, or the eyes connected you to the old one and I didn't have to worry about all the external things?
No, it was nothing about love. It was, and it was such an intense role. I mean, when they sent him home with me, I was terrified. We had over 30 drugs that I was responsible for, to dole out to him on a schedule. And he was so frail and that I was so terrified of him falling, like in the middle of the night and such, So it was a constant vigilance of taking care of this person who had never once, he was so independent before that I never had to keep such a close eye on him. And so it was like having an infant, but this big, hairy, bossy infant to take care of.
No hair.
No hair. But my greatest feeling was that I struggled with was absolute fear. I could get so overwhelmed with fear, like I was drowning in fear. Yeah. And my greatest fear, of course, was losing him. Sure. Because there was never, ever one guarantee, and any little sickness could take him, any little thing. He could fall and hit his head, any little thing. He was taken to such a low level that it was terrifying. One thing I did want to share was a vision that God gave me, because he had given me a vision in the very, very beginning, 10 years ago or so, when Kevin was first diagnosed because of the fear. And that vision, I kept trying to bring it up and it wouldn't work for me. And so, and I'm not meaning that in a weird way. It just, it's just how God worked for me. So I just begged and pleaded, please give me something. And he gave me this verse. It's Deuteronomy 33:12.
Okay.
Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. And God gave me that vision because it was me getting a piggyback ride on God, and I would rest my head on his shoulders, just like my grandkids do with me. And I love when they do that because you can tell they feel so secure and comforted. And so, man, when I would get so distressed and just feeling so fearful, I would literally, in my mind, climb up on God's back and hang on and rest my cheek on his shoulder blades.
That's when God becomes Abba Father at that point.
Abba Father, and he was the rock and the foundation, and the fear would subside for a while, and of course it would come back because I'm human, and I'd climb off his back and say, I got this, God. And
I may have to come back to here again really, really, really soon.
Yeah. And
it is perspective. Jeremy and I were talking, I think last week in the persecution, or last month in the persecution series, we both had a couple of bad weeks, and nothing in comparison to what you guys been to. But in Psalm 73, he says, God, my feet are slipping. Surely you bless those who are pure at heart. So what he's saying is, I'm pure at heart, but I'm looking at this guy. He's mocking you, and he gets blessings. My next door neighbors, they're not even believers, and he just got a raise in a new car, and my feet are starting to slip. And if you read the rest of the verse, he says, but I realized you have me by your right hand. And so the thought is, if I'm in control of the grip, I can slip away. But if he's in control of the grip, I'm really in no danger of slipping away. Did you ever get that? That's kind of where that head on the shoulders, where that's where your security of he's got this. Regardless how it turns out, he's got this.
It was just complete comfort.
Yeah.
It was, I can just lay here and rest and know that I'm secure in him.
So how did you get comfort, Kevin? I mean, was there time, or I've never had, no one's ever accused me of having an analytical mind. So in fact, I've been accused of not having one at all. But I'm thinking of you're such a thinker. Where do you allow yourself to just trust and shut down the machine a little bit? Or did you, or can you? I don't know.
I don't think I could through effort. I was so wiped out that there really was no thinking about much. I mean, really, you're just existing there. I was certainly, when I would think about Danille, I was inspired by her because at times I tried, we talk about trying to reverse roles.
Yeah.
We talked to each other about that. Well, think about if you were me, what you'd be going through. And we chatted about that, and I realized, wow, what she's going through, all I have to do is sort of survive. She's got the responsibility of helping me survive, which I think is really daunting, and the way she dealt with it is what she just described to you.
Yeah. So losing your independence, because you were a very independent guy, and now, there's a sense of humility that has to take over at that point in there.
Yeah. That hurt a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Not being able to get up the stairs, or not being interested in anything.
Yeah.
Seeing pictures of my former life and just not being able to relate to them at all. That was really tough. Yeah.
Yeah. And any moments where you're like, hello, God, where are you?
Oh, several. Yeah. Like,
walk us through one of those, because I'm sure there's somebody out there listening right now who's smack dead in the middle of saying, help Mr. Whereser get me off this crazy machine here.
Yeah, I think I went back and forth between thinking, well, God doesn't really mean anything by this. He is God and He said He loves you, and He does, and you can't really, that doesn't waver, and this stuff is just temporary that you're going through. But it's so heavy, it's hurt so much. Then I could get myself back to, well, it's just what it is for a while, and you just sort of got to hang there.
Yeah.
But the outcome of it was I have a lot more empathy now than I used to.
Yeah. You like that about yourself?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. There's a lady named Irene that we ran into at Mayo as when I was sort of on the getting better part of the curve. I think it was about March or April, and I had just had some medication given to me or something. I don't remember, but I was doing pretty good. I was walking. So, and we were I pushed the down button on the elevator, and we were waiting for it because we were on the 7th floor. And then I hear this little voice behind me say, "Can I talk to you?" And I turned around, and it was Irene and her husband, and I didn't know Irene. And she told me her story, and she'd really been through the ringer. And she was having a bone marrow transplant, but she'd had a lot of complications. And I think this was actually, it might have been her second bone marrow transplant. I'm not sure. I know she'd had treatment before and sort of gotten through it and was on getting better, and then she got sick again. And I just felt so bad for her. I had to sit down and talk to her, and I still haven't forgotten her and her story, and I pray for her a lot. Yeah. So, what's really changed inside of me, besides really believing that prayer is a system that works. Yeah. And when I say works, it's not what you or I or Jeremy thinks about working. Yeah. We think working creates a defined result that we're happy with, but I don't think prayer, although it works, it's a system that works, the end result is not what we think. I really don't.
Otherwise, it's all secondary, really.
Yeah. But anyway, that's another part of me that's really changed is when I see people suffering in any way, really. It doesn't have to be cancer or something, but when I know they're hurting, I really feel it.
Today, you get to be Irene to a lot of listeners today, so I think that's cool. Yeah.
There's been a lot of positivity in what you guys have been talking about. There's been a lot of positivity in what you guys have been talking about, and positive impact that this has had on you guys. But I also know that, for other people, not only for other people, but I do know for you guys, there's been some setbacks, some low points, some things that you've been through throughout the duration of the treatment, recovery, etc., remission. So can you guys talk to some of those things that you went through, how you got through them, where they brought you?
Well, definitely, we don't want this to seem like we just sailed through this, because that's not the case at all. It was extremely difficult and frightening. And then throughout the last 10 years, from Kevin's first diagnosis to then when the disease changed to 4 years ago to then last year finding out about the transplant, we as a family had to come together on 3 different occasions and pretty much do an intervention for him, insisting that he get some help because he was so thoroughly depressed. And that was very, very hard on all of us. I think it brought us closer together too. Mm-hmm. But that was definitely one of the harder parts of it. And then you asked also, we were told when he was got out of the hospital, oh, you'll be back. And we really did think, oh no, because we're going to do everything we can, Mm-hmm. Well, sure enough, he had to go back 2 different occasions, and it takes you by surprise each time. The first time was pretty devastating to Kevin, I think, and you were there, 3 or 4 more days. But then actually it just happened again in June, so just a couple months ago. And we went just for a regular doctor's appointment thinking everything was grand, but then she was adamant. His potassium was so high that she's like, you are looking at dropping dead of a heart attack right this minute. He wanted to just forget about it and go home, but then I wouldn't let him.
Yeah. Where does that take? He's doing so well. And I remember, vicariously going through this as I'm hearing it through family and whatnot is Kevin's doing well. He's tracking well, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's this kind of change in status. So where does that take you? What are you thinking through? It's an emotional roller coaster. I expect that you're riding so high, and then all of a sudden it drops out from you. The bottom drops out. So, what are the things that are going through your mind? What are you telling yourself? What are you thinking about during those times?
Well, I think half the time, you really just try to get through it. You're like, okay, what do we have to do? It is one of those, we were starting to get pretty good at expecting anything. What did you used to say? It was, well, it's like you try not to have expectations, but expect anything at the same time, because, and just holding everything really loosely. But we were getting onto a roll, like things were going pretty good. And then, so each little setback, it knocked you on your butt, but then you don't really have too many choices. You just have to go through it and get back up. And
it's a great question, because I remember being really mad, having to go back in the hospital and having a really strong dislike, and that's sort of putting it mildly for the doctors that were putting me there. I didn't want to go. How did I eventually deal with it? I think I knew inside that the doctors were doing what they thought was right, and I sort of needed to listen to them and, put aside what I wanted. There's a lot of that along the way. You put aside what you want frequently.
Yeah, humility is a hard lesson to learn. I've heard from other ones that have got there. I'm not quite there yet, but I've heard it's a hard journey.
Yeah, and then as far as Danille was talking about the 2 or 3 different times over the last 8 years where the family has cornered me, at least that's what it felt like to me, and said, hey, this isn't going good. You got to change what you're doing, Dad. And they were pretty specific. They wanted me to go on antidepressants. And I didn't want to, but I think at least in one case of the 3 that I can remember, they were right. I'm still not sure. I'm still not sure about the other. But what I remember is that what they appeared to me to be mad or angry with me. I'm not sure why. I think they were, but I think they were also very concerned. But I think, that is a problem with the analytical mind, is everything has to be explained.
Yeah. Everything has to have an answer, a working answer.
Sometimes that's just not the right approach.
So like in your really lowest moment, did you ever make peace, either one of you or both of you, with the end result could be death? Did you come to a place of peace there, and how did that affect? Yeah. How did that affect moving on forward?
I definitely did, and like Danille said earlier when we were off air, there was a 20% chance of just not making it through the treatment at all, and then even when you get through it and you get home, you're still in bad shape, and lots of bad things can happen in terms of not making it. And you really just have to give stuff up in your mind, and that's how I made peace with it. I gave up wanting to shoot par. I gave up, wanting to go hike a mountain. I gave up wanting to visit with my grandchildren. I gave all that stuff up, or I was prepared to give that stuff up. Yeah. And I was okay with it. Yeah. I mean, I didn't like it.
No.
But I got to the point where, and you get a lot of practice when you're laying on the couch for 50, 60 days in a row of giving stuff up. I mean, you just don't do very much.
And some of it I give up. I don't really have a choice other than that. Yeah. I get, when you're telling that story, I just get that vision of, Abraham with his son. Like, he's prepared to take his son's life.
It's exactly what it is.
And
that's exactly what
gave
it
up. What, Danille, when you came to that sense where this may be a real ending, how did you make peace with that?
I think a lot of it was even before, the 6 weeks before he had the transplant is probably when I wrestled with all of that the most, because that was just so difficult for me, and then of course throughout. But when he got home from the hospital, I mean, I was in a new role of caretaker nurse, like just trying to keep him alive on a daily basis that way. So I think I really went through all of that ahead of time, and I can't say I ever made peace with it. I mean, I think I flat out told God, I do not want to lose him. I understood I could, but I never came to like, okay, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
I know that if it came to that, God would help me get to that place. But no, I was never ready to say, sure, that's good with me. Yeah. And when Kevin said like he didn't understand why the family was mad at him, at the time he wasn't right in his mind, so he would say things like, you would be better off without me, because he really felt that. He felt that he was a burden to me and to our children, and that we would be better off without him. And that's what made us so furious, but that's a person who can't see things correctly, because there's no way we would be better off without him. So that's why we got so adamant that this is why you need help.
Yeah. As your family stands today, because we're in a good place right now as we're doing this broadcast, what do you think, like, the number one benefit to your family as a whole? You'd mentioned that you're closer, but what else can you see, like one of the positive benefits of this, we haven't figured another name, but journey, this ride that you've been on, or that you're on? Like, if I was to go around and ask each one of your children individually what was the biggest win for them in all of this, again, not fair to ask you what they would answer, but from a mom and pop's perspective, what do you think the biggest value to all of this?
Well, I think each one of them would say how much they appreciate and love their dad now. Not that they didn't before, but they have a whole new love and appreciation for him. It's just little things. If we'll send a video about something and he happens to laugh, I mean, it's someone invariably would say, I love Dad's laugh. So they don't take things for granted. I think each of them are much, much closer and appreciative of him. And then just on another level, Kevin and I we're at a whole new level. I mean, you know how God promises that he will make good out of bad.
Yep.
We've almost been married 37 years.
Wow.
And but our depth of love, of trust, of honesty, of communication, of being absolutely real with each other has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
And that's probably in the last 6 months even. Mm-hmm. So this trial has definitely brought us to the place where we really truly are best friends now, and we just really just take care of each other, and we're as different as people could be.
Yeah.
but very close.
But this trial was united. Would you say that you agree?
Yeah, but no, you asked about what from a father or a mother's eyes, what do we think were the wins for our children? I would, besides everything that Danille said, I agree with. I think that they probably got a view to what eventually will happen for them, one way or the other.
Your mortality comes face to face with you.
Yeah, bad things happen, and so they probably learned a little bit about that without actually being the target of it yet. And I think you know our children actually pretty well, because they spent a lot of time with you growing up through the youth group. So I think they all derived something different. Sarah probably derived a little courage out of it.
Yeah.
Micah probably derived some data out of it that he'll use in some future instance. Becca probably learned how to cope with things that are stressful a little more than she knows how to cope now.
Yeah.
But they all got something out of it, I think, positive.
I mean, that's really the purpose for this story. Vicarious learning is a great learning. I can learn a hard lesson without going through the hard, event. And I hope as people hear this podcast, they'll learn not only just to look in the eyes, but to learn how to live in the moment. Do you feel like you live in the moment now more than you ever did before? Like you appreciate the moment? Does it feel that way?
Yes. I mean, I still plan for things that
well, it's a family trait, I know.
Yeah. No, that I want to do that are like, okay, next week I'll go do this.
So you're not afraid to dream anymore. You're not letting this paralyze you and not...
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I can still think forward into time and think about things I'd like to do in the future.
Yeah.
But when things happen, there's a lot more enjoyment in them, that's for sure, when good things happen. You were asking earlier about things that have changed that I think are for better for me, as well as for the children. But I think for me, like I was saying earlier, empathy. So I was thinking while Danille was talking a little bit about how that's changed for me. And it's like I used to look at people and their troubles and think, oh, that's too bad.
And if I could give a moment's help or two, I would, or maybe more. But it never really touched me. Like I could, after I was done helping them, sort of brush off my hands and go on to what's next. But now I can't do that. Now it's different inside. I feel different inside about what people are going through, and I want more that it gets better.
Yeah.
Right. I want a lot more for it to get better. Than
It's
it
a
used to.
different feeling, but it's a rewarding feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, we mentioned this a lot. It was our very first podcast, which we talked about reframing. And reframing is if I change the meaning of something, I change the corresponding feeling to where one day you could say, I'm thankful for cancer because, like, no one wants to go through it. It was horrible. The journey was tough. But I learned some valuable things. So, like, what did cancer teach either one of you that no other lesson could have? I mean, empathy would obviously be one of them for you, but I'll start with Danille, because what did cancer teach you that maybe no other lesson could have taught you?
Well, I would have to say for me, the thing that I've realized that I'm the most thankful and grateful for going through this whole trial with Kevin is just the depth of our relationship and how close we've become, and just a sweetness that it's brought to our relationship. And so, yes, it was a very, very, and still is, difficult time, but yet there's just a real sweetness to our friendship and relationship now that I can almost say made this worth it because it's brought us to such a depth. So would I recommend it? I can't say that I would, but has it been worth it? I would say yes, because of that. So, and then another thing that I just really wanted to make sure I touched on is the love and support that we received from so many people. And like Kevin had mentioned, a while back, that we did leave organized church per se years ago, but we never left the community of believers. And of course, we never left our love for God. And those community of believers are what sustained us and brought us through. And actually, many of your buddies, Kevin's golf buddies, who a lot aren't even believers, but they showed up, and in everyone in different ways. So I guess one thing I would like to say is, if you have an idea, go for it. We had one friend when he was in the hospital that she came by about 9 at night with warm cookies and milk, like 3 different types of milk. And the kids and I and the grandkids were around the island, and it was one of the sweetest memories I have of eating these warm cookies and trying all this milk. And I mean, what a blessing, And people gave us gas cards because we were up and back to Mayo, many cars, times a day. That was such a practical but good thing. Yeah. A gift card to Costco, meals, a huge basket. And I know Kevin wasn't able to appreciate a lot of this at the time because he was in the hospital and and then even when he was at home, but people, and then praying and the kind words they would say, that I really, it meant a lot to me. The one thing that was a struggle for me was when people would share a story about somebody else, because mostly I wanted to say I don't really care.
Correct.
Because our story is our story, and it's going to go the way it's going to go. And I know most everybody meant it in a good way.
Yep.
And maybe some people would respond well, but believe me, we were told terrible stories, and we were told really wonderful stories of people that have lived 19 years and whatever. But I didn't care because this was Kevin's story, and we had no idea how it was going to go.
Yeah.
So that was,
that's
I don't know why,
It was
but
our story.
It was our story.
Yeah.
But so that was one thing I guess I wish that I would rather have not heard everyone's story.
Yeah. No.
Can I talk about that support thing just a little
Absolutely.
bit
Yeah.
more? So,
Or if I said no, what you were still going to do it anyway.
I just keep talking. But no, you may know that Danille has been the prime mover, really, behind a group of ladies that gets together every Tuesday night.
Yep.
And I don't know how many years it's been, 25?
No, like 15.
15 years. And I know all these ladies now because they come over to our house. It used to always be at our place. Then they started rotating, and then they stayed away while I just wasn't feeling very good. Now they're coming back to our house again. But even though I was pretty much out of it, I could watch these ladies taking care of Danille. They really did.
Yeah. Oh man, that must have made you feel good, especially when you think I can't do it.
Yeah, it did. They were so loving, and a couple of them would come in that know me better because maybe I've gotten to know their husbands through this.
Yeah.
So they'd come over and they'd start talking to me, and they'd tell me how good I looked, and I'd think, I know I don't. And they'd touch me on my head. Oh, you're getting a little hair. No, I'm not. But they were just really trying to help.
Yeah.
And that community, I know there are people out there that think, well, being with other believers all the time maybe isn't necessary. Maybe I can do this by myself. But when I saw how those ladies took care of her, it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
And loved you and prayed for you and
Yeah.
still do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and still do. Yeah.
it starts in the first 2 chapters of Genesis that we were created for a relationship, you know, and that becomes quite evident in times like this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But I think what's really cool, and I don't know if it always goes like this, but Danille and her friends have cultivated these relationships with each others over the 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
And when the time of need comes, for any of them, they all jump in. It's really cool to watch.
yeah,
I don't really have that with any men where we all know each other so well and we see each other so frequently and talk with each other so frequently that
Yeah.
when someone's in a time of need, we all jump on it. But
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened with her.
yeah,
And I'm okay with that. I think that one of my ideas about God is that he has us all in different places at different times for good reason. Because if we were all in the same place at the same time with respect to spiritual growth, it would be really boring and we wouldn't be able to help each other.
yeah.
So because she and I are in different places, we can help each other. And
Yeah.
because
Oh, good
she's
point.
got all these friends, they can all help each other,
Yeah.
even though they're in different places spiritually. So
That almost sounds like the Apostle Paul saying the body works together. That's-
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was good. Well, Jeremy, I could listen to this all day long, and I know I'm a little selfish when it comes up because we love Kevin and Danelle and their family. Anything that left unsaid a point you wanted to get across? But I hope if people want to contact you, can they do that through us if they like to know more of your story or have some questions about, hey, I'm here, what did you do? Are you guys
Sure.
open?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my missions, really, is if someone wants help on this, if they're going through what I went through or something like
Yeah.
it, I'm there for them.
We have a whole vat of untapped empathy here that needs to be used.
Exactly.
So if you're in need of some, Jeremy, how can they get a hold of them? And again, guys, thank you for the vulnerability to tell the story. Both scary and powerful at the same time. You've mastered. It feels like you've mastered the grief. And somebody else gets some benefit from that too. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Definitely. And so you may be listening to this podcast. You may want to know more. You may want to, hopefully you got something out of this and can share it with others or apply it to your own life. If you're going through a similar situation. But if you do want to know more, if you do want to get in touch, we have a couple places you can do that on Facebook, facebook.com/RP podcast. Instagram, you can direct message us there at RP Podcast, and then also on Twitter at the RP Podcast. If you want to re-listen to this at any point or
share it,
or want to listen to any of the previous podcasts, you can always do that through our website, which is www.rppodcast.com/podcast. So we enjoyed having you guys, Danelle and Kevin. Thank you so much again, like Gary said, for just being vulnerable, open, transparent, and hopefully that reaches someone and helps someone, and they can navigate through this trial the same better because of it. So we really do appreciate that. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for listening, and we hope that it touched you, and we hope that it helped you, and we are so glad that you listened. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.